The boy stood trembling in the doorway of the rice cake shop. His 3-year-old sister strapped to his back with a worn bedsheet knotted carefully across his chest. He had spent 6 hours in the biting Houston winter collecting glass bottles and scrap metal from the alleys behind the Midtown Market. $12.40 pressed into his freezing palm. Enough for one small box of rice cakes, or so he had hoped. It was Zoba's birthday, he told himself. There has to be something. But the shopkeeper didn't even look up. We don't give away product. The boy, Jeff, swallowed the shame, turned toward the door. His sister Zoba pressed her cold nose against the back of his neck, still trusting him completely, the way she always had. Then a deep voice cut through the silence from the far corner of the shop. Wait. No one in Houston said wait to a man like Kim Jae-won. They said yes, sir. They said of course, sir. They said whatever was necessary to keep their hands attached to their wrists and their businesses off the evening news. Kim Jae-won had not built the largest private empire in the state of Texas by being the kind of man people interrupted, questioned, or kept waiting. He was 61 years old, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that cost more than most people's cars, seated alone at a corner table in a rice cake shop in the 3rd Ward, because his personal physician had told him, with the careful neutrality of a man who valued his own continued employment, that he needed to begin eating differently. His cardiologist had used the phrase critically elevated. Kim had told him he appreciated the update and left before the man could finish his sentence. He had been sitting in this shop for 20 minutes, eating steamed rice cakes with a paper cup of ginger tea, reviewing nothing, thinking nothing in particular, which was its own kind of unusual. Kim Jae-won always had something to think about. 3 construction fronts, 2 import companies that existed on paper, and 1 that existed in reality. A network of restaurants across Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio that laundered money with the quiet efficiency of a well-maintained machine. 11 men who answered directly to him, and 400 who answered to those 11. He had been thinking about none of this tonight. He had been thinking about his wife, Mi-rae, who had been dead for 4 years and 3 months, and how she had loved Taeok, and how this particular shop had been the one she dragged him to every December when the holiday flavors came out, and how he had complained every single time about parking, and about the cold, and about how there were better things to do with a Tuesday evening, and how he would give every dollar he had ever earned to be complaining to her again right now in this exact moment. He had been sitting with this thought in the particular way he had learned to sit with it, not fighting it, not feeding it, just letting it occupy the space it insisted on occupying, when the door opened and the boy walked in. Jeff Hayes was 11 years old and already knew how to make himself invisible. He had learned it the way children learn most important things, not from instruction, but from necessity. You kept your eyes down. You moved close to walls. You did not take up space that wasn't explicitly offered. In the 3rd Ward of Houston, Texas, in the December of his 11th year, invisibility was not a social strategy. It was a survival skill, as fundamental as keeping your shoes dry and your little sister fed. Neither of which he was managing particularly well tonight. His jacket was a hand-me-down from the church donation box on Alameda Road, synthetic filling long since compressed into useless flat panels that let the Houston cold straight through. His sneakers had a split along the left toe that opened and closed with every step like a small, wet mouth, letting slush in faster than body heat could counter it. His socks had been wet since noon. He had stopped feeling his left foot around 3 in the afternoon and had spent the subsequent hours conducting periodic checks, flexing, pressing, counting toes, to confirm it was still there and still his. Zoba was 3 years old and weighed 26 pounds, which Jeff knew precisely because he had lifted her onto the scale at the Walgreens on Elgin Street 2 weeks ago, and done the math. 26 pounds of little sister, bundled into every warm thing he had been able to find that morning. A fleece zip-up that swallowed her entirely. 2 mismatched socks on her hands because her actual mittens had been left on the Metro bus 2 weeks ago. A knitted hat, 2 sizes too big, that kept sliding down over her eyes, which she corrected by tilting her head back at a persistent upward angle that made her look, Jeff had always thought, like she was perpetually about to ask a question. She had her face pressed against his neck now, breath coming in soft, even puffs he could feel through the collar of his jacket. She had been drifting in and out of light sleep for the last hour, lulled by the rhythm of his walking the way she always was. She was not crying. She had learned somehow, even at 3, that crying used up warmth she could not afford to waste. Jeff did not know when she had learned this. The fact that she had learned it at all sat in him like something he was not ready to look at directly. Today was their mother's birthday. December 17th. Maya Hayes was 40 years old and lying in the back room of their 2-room apartment on Holman Street, unable to stand without gripping the wall, unable to work, unable to do much of anything except breathe carefully and try to smile when her children came in to check on her. Jeff had spent 6 hours today doing what he always did when he needed money and had no other option. He had worked the alleys behind the Midtown Market, bottles, cans, scrap metal, anything the recycling center on Leland Avenue would take. He had done it quietly, methodically, the way his mother had taught him to do hard things, and at the end of 6 hours, he had $12.40, and cold that had reached all the way to the center of him. He had walked to this shop because he remembered his mother mentioning it once, the rice cake shop near the Korean grocery on Alabama Street, the one that sold the honey ones she liked. She hadn't been inside in over a year. She hadn't been much of anywhere in over a year. He had not expected to buy a full box. He had hoped, with the specific, desperate hope of a child who has learned to keep hope small and practical, that there might be something left over. Something from yesterday, something nobody wanted anymore, something about to be thrown away. He had been wrong about the shopkeeper. He had not counted on the man in the corner. Kim Jae-won did not stand up for anyone. He had not stood up for a city councilman who had kept him waiting 40 minutes for a meeting Kim had not wanted in the first place. He had not stood up for the Houston Chronicle reporter who had, with great professional courage and very little subsequent career longevity, or written a piece connecting 3 of Kim's restaurants to a federal money laundering investigation. He had not stood up for the head of the Texas Korean Business Association when the man had come to him, hat in hand, voice carefully steady, to ask for a donation to the annual gala. He stood up now. He did not fully understand why. He would think about it later, alone in his car, and he would decide that it was Mireille, that it was something about the shape of the boy's shoulders, the precise, particular way they had dropped when the shopkeeper spoke, like something essential had gone out of them, that had reminded him of a quality his wife had possessed in extraordinary abundance, which was the capacity to carry things without letting anyone see the weight. He reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat. "How much for the full display case?" he said to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper looked up. His expression went through several phases in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then the very specific species of careful calm that came over people's faces when they realized who they were looking at. "Mr. Kim, the display case, the full inventory, everything you have tonight. What's the number?" The shopkeeper named a number. Kim placed cash on the counter without counting it, which he knew would communicate more than any specific amount could. He turned to the boy. Jeff had not moved. He was standing exactly where he had stopped when the voice spoke. 3 feet from the door, Zoba still against his neck, the $12 still in his fist. He was looking at Kim with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite hope, and was almost entirely caution, which Kim found, unexpectedly, to be the most honest expression he had seen on a human face in a very long time. "What's your name?" Kim said. It was not a question. Kim Jae-won had not asked a question in a tone that sounded like a question in many years. "Jeff?" A pause. "Jeff Hayes." "Who's on your back, Jeff Hayes?" "My sister, Zoba. She's 3. Kim looked at the girl. She had lifted her head from her brother's neck and was looking at Kim with the total, unguarded curiosity of a 3-year-old encountering something new. Her hat had slid down over one eye. She did not correct it. She studied Kim with the available eye, with the focused, serious attention of a scientist examining a specimen. "She can see you," Jeff said, as if this required clarification. "She's not scared." "I can see that," Kim said. He looked at the boy for a long moment. 11 years old, wet shoes, $12 in his hand, 6 hours of bottle collecting visible in the particular quality of his exhaustion, the way tiredness settles differently in a child who has been working than in one who has simply been cold. "Sit down," Kim said, pulling out the chair across from his own. Jeff did not sit. He stood with the careful stillness of a child who has learned that sitting down in the wrong place at the wrong time could cost you things you did not know you had to lose. "I'm not going to hurt you," Kim said. He said it flatly, without warmth, which was somehow more convincing than reassurance would have been. Jeff sat down. But Kim bought 2 boxes of the honey rice cakes, the red bean ones, and the sesame variety his wife had always claimed were the best, and which he had always pretended to find merely acceptable. He had the shopkeeper box them properly, with ribbon, the way the shop did for holidays. He set the boxes on the table in front of Jeff. "Tell me about your mother," he said. He had not planned to say this. He was not a man who asked people about their mothers. He was a man who asked people about numbers and timelines and whether certain problems had been resolved in the manner and time frame that had been specified. He did not invite personal disclosure. He did not create space for it. Jeff looked at him for a long moment with those careful eyes. And then, slowly, methodically, in the flat, precise tone of a child who has learned to report facts without inflection because inflection costs too much, he told Kim about his mother. Maya Hayes had been a licensed vocational nurse at Houston Methodist for 9 years. She had worked the cardiac wing, nights mostly, double shifts when the staffing fell short, which it always did. She had been the kind of nurse who stayed 20 minutes past the end of her shift because a patient was frightened and she could not make herself leave a frightened person alone. She had been the kind of nurse who learned the names of people's children and brought them birthday cards. She had been very good at her job in the way that people are when they have found the specific thing they were built to do. 14 months ago, there had been an accident. Jeff told it without drama. The patient lift on the 3rd-floor cardiac ward had been flagged for maintenance 4 times over 8 months. Nobody had serviced it. It failed during a transfer. His mother had caught the patient. She had taken the impact across her lower back and gone down on the hallway floor while the patient she had just saved stood over her asking if she was okay. 3 fractured vertebrae. Nerve damage. Surgery required. Rehabilitation required. Neither of which they could afford because the insurance company had been denying her workers' compensation claim for 14 months, citing a pre-existing condition that did not exist. His father had left 9 months ago. Jeff did not say this with bitterness. He said it with the same flat precision he said everything, which was worse. "Insulin," Jeff said. His mother was diabetic. The free clinic could not provide it consistently. On the months when the numbers did not work, his mother, had made a choice. Jeff had figured this out 4 months ago by doing the math on the pill organizer and the calendar and saying nothing about it because saying something about it would not change the math. He said all of this in approximately 6 minutes. Then he stopped. Kim sat across from him and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with the cardiac condition his cardiologist had described with carefully measured language 3 weeks ago. He had built an empire on the management of problems. He had solved problems that most men in his position would have considered unsolvable, using methods that most men in his position would have preferred not to know about. He had never once, and in 40 years of building and protecting what was his, allowed a problem to persist simply because solving it was inconvenient. He looked at this 11-year-old boy with $12 and wet shoes and a sleeping 3-year-old on his back, and he recognized something in him so cleanly it almost stopped his breath. He recognized someone who had decided, without being asked, without being told, without anyone acknowledging or witnessing the decision, to hold everything together with nothing. Mireille had seen people this way. She had walked into a room and immediately found the person who was carrying something no one could see. And she had gone straight to them, because that was what she did. Because she had always believed that the ones holding on quietly were the ones who needed someone to notice most. Kim was not his wife. He had never been his wife. He had spent 40 years being the opposite of his wife in nearly every measurable way. But he was in her rice cake shop on her birthday month, and he was looking at a boy she would have walked straight to without hesitation, and he was suddenly completely certain that he was not going to get up from this table and go home. "Where do you live?" he said. "Holman Street," Jeff said. "Off Emancipation." "How far is that from here?" "About a mile." Kim looked at Zoba, still asleep on her brother's back, the hat down over one eye, the small, serious face relaxed now into the perfect trust of sleep. "I'm going to drive you home," he said. Jeff's eyes went very still. "I have a black car outside," Kim said. "My driver's name is Juan. He has been driving me for 11 years, and he will not touch you. I'm going to carry these boxes, and you're going to walk next to me, and we're going to go to your car and drive to Holman Street." A long pause. "Why?" Jeff said. It was the right question. Kim respected it. "Because it's cold," Kim said. "And you've been carrying your sister for 6 hours, and you're a mile from home. And because I'd like to meet your mother." Jeff looked at him for 10 full seconds with those measuring, careful eyes. "She's not well," he said finally. "I know," Kim said. "You told me." Another pause. Then slowly, Jeff stood. The car was a black Mercedes S-Class. Juan opened the rear door without being asked, read the situation with the specific, comprehensive silence of a man who had spent 11 years reading his employer's situations, and helped Jeff with the boxes without making anything of it. The drive to Holman Street took 9 minutes. Zoba woke up somewhere around the 3rd minute, lifted her head from her brother's neck, looked around the interior of the car with the complete calm of someone for whom unexpected luxury was simply the next thing happening, and then looked at Kim. "Your coat is shiny," she said. "It is," Kim agreed. "It's nice. Thank you." She put her head back on her brother's neck and went back to sleep. Jeff watched this exchange and said nothing, but something in his face, some fraction of the vigilance, eased slightly. They stopped in front of a 2-story building on Holman Street, the kind of building that had once been something and was now managed by someone who understood that people with nowhere else to go had no choice but to keep paying. The front steps had a crack running diagonally across the bottom riser. 2 of the light fixtures in the entry hallway were dark. The mailboxes had been opened with a screwdriver at some point and never repaired. Jeff walked him up 1 flight, apartment 2C. He knocked. A voice came from inside, careful, quiet, controlled, asking who was there. "It's me, Mama. I brought somebody." A pause, the particular pause of a woman calculating threat from a horizontal position. "Jeff." "It's okay," Jeff said, in a tone that Kim recognized, because it was the same tone he himself had used for 40 years to move people past hesitation. "I have assessed the situation. It's handled. Trust me." Coming from an 11-year-old, it landed differently. The door opened. Maya Hayes was 40 years old and had the eyes of someone 20 years older who had decided to survive anyway. She was propped in the doorway in a flannel robe and thick socks, one hand on the doorframe, the other braced against the wall. She was thin in the way that people are when their body has been consuming itself for a long time, and they have been too busy managing everything else to attend to it. She looked at Kim Jae-won, standing in her hallway in a charcoal overcoat, holding 2 boxes of rice cakes tied with ribbon, and her expression did not change. She had the same quality of perfect, careful stillness her son had. Kim recognized it as the family's primary inheritance. The absolute discipline of showing nothing until you knew what you were dealing with. "Mr. she began. "Kim," he said. "Your son found me, or I found him. The distinction may not matter." He held out the boxes. "He wanted to bring you something for your birthday." "He did." Maya looked at the boxes. She looked at Jeff. Jeff was looking at her with the expression of a child who has done something and is waiting to learn whether it was the right thing. Her face broke, not dramatically, not with tears, but with the small, precise fracture of a woman whose composure has held for a very long time, under very significant pressure, and who has just had something kind done to her without warning or preparation. "Come in," she said. Kim sat in the apartment for 2 hours. He had not intended to. He had intended to deliver the boy safely, introduce himself, understand the situation in its specifics, and determine next steps. He was a man of next steps. Sentiment was not a strategy. The lingering was not productive. He stayed for 2 hours. Maya Hayes, from her position on the small couch with 3 pillows supporting her back, was the most precise and unsentimental narrator of her own circumstances he had ever encountered. She laid out the facts of her situation with the clinical clarity of a woman who had been a medical professional for 9 years and who had spent 14 months in the role of patient, insurance claimant, appeals petitioner, and failed litigant with no attorney and no income and 2 children. She did not ask him for anything. This was the detail that cut through everything else. She laid out the facts. She answered his questions directly and completely. She did not perform suffering. She did not appeal. She presented data. How Kim had spent 40 years surrounded by people who wanted things from him, people who performed and angled and framed and maneuvered. In 4 years of grief and isolation, he had forgotten that there existed a different category of human being entirely. People who had too much dignity to want things from strangers, even when they needed them desperately. Mireille had been one of those people. She had been the most dignified human being Kim had ever known, and she had loved him despite everything he was, and he had never fully understood what he had been given until it was gone. He looked at Maya Hayes on her couch, her spine broken and her bank account empty, and her birthday cake in a box on a coffee table that had a crack running through the glass top, and he thought about his wife. When he left at 11 o'clock, he stood in the hallway outside 2C and made 3 phone calls. The first was to his personal attorney. The second was to the chief of staff at Houston Methodist, a man who had attended 3 of Kim's private events and who understood clearly the nature of the relationship. The third was to a surgeon, the best spinal reconstruction specialist in Texas, who operated out of the Texas Medical Center 12 blocks away, and who had, on 2 separate occasions, asked Kim for favors that Kim had not forgotten. He made the calls in the same flat, unhurried voice he used for every call. He stated what he needed. He specified the timeline. He did not explain or negotiate. Then he walked back down the stairs, through the cracked front step, out into the Houston December night, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the lit window of apartment 2C. He could see the shadow of Zoba on the glass, hat still half over one eye, moving around the room with the confident energy of a child who has been given something sweet and has decided to be awake again. He stood there for longer than he had intended. Then he got in the car and told Juan to drive. In the back seat, alone, in the particular silence he had carried for 4 years and 3 months, Kim Jae-won felt something happen in his chest that had nothing to do with his cardiac condition. It was smaller than hope and larger than habit. He did not have a name for it. He looked out the window at Houston moving past in the dark. The skyline he had spent 40 years building a shadow empire beneath. The streets he knew better than most men knew their own living rooms. And for the first time in 4 years, he did not feel the city as absence. He felt it as something that was still going on. He leaned back. He thought about a boy with $12 and wet shoes and his sister on his back, standing in a rice cake shop with his shoulders carrying something no one could see, asking for something nobody wanted. He thought about how close he had come to not being in that shop tonight. How many other Tuesdays he had sat in this car and driven past. He thought about Mi Ray, who would have been out of her chair and across that shop before the shopkeeper finished speaking. "You see someone who needs something," she used to say. "You do it. That's the whole job." He had never been good at that particular job. He was beginning to think, for the first time, that it was not too late to learn it. In apartment 2C on Holman Street, Jeff Hayes sat on the floor with Zoba in his lap, watching their mother eat honey rice cake in small, careful bites, and felt the knot behind his sternum. The one that had been there so long he had stopped registering it as separate from himself. Loosen, just slightly, just enough. He did not know what the man in the charcoal coat was going to do. But he had heard those phone calls. He had heard the voice. Flat, absolute, the voice of a man who said things once because once was sufficient. And for the first time in a very long time, Jeff Hayes went to sleep without doing the math. The first thing Kim Jae-won did the morning after the rice cake shop was something he had not done in 4 years. He came back. He arrived at 7:45 in the morning with Juan driving and a paper bag from the Korean grocery on Alabama Street in his lap. Insulin, 2 types, the specific brands his attorney had identified through the pharmacy records his medical contact had pulled without asking why. Along with groceries, the real kind, the kind that filled a refrigerator rather than supplemented it. Eggs, rice, protein, vegetables his wife had always insisted on. 2 gallons of whole milk because Zoba was 3 years old and whole milk was not a luxury. It was a requirement. And the fact that it had apparently been treated as a luxury in this household was a problem he intended to correct immediately. He also brought a folder. The folder contained the name and direct number of Marcus Lim, the best workers' compensation attorney in Harris County, who had agreed, after a phone call with Kim the previous evening that lasted 4 minutes, to take Maya Hayes' case on a full contingency basis, beginning that morning, with no upfront cost of any kind. Kim left the folder on the kitchen table without ceremony. Maya Hayes looked at it from her position on the couch. Then she looked at Kim. "I don't need charity," she said. "It's not charity," Kim said. "It's a lawyer. You have a case. The equipment failure is documented. The maintenance requests are on record. The hospital's liability exposure is significant. Mr. Lim will confirm this within the week. A pause. "Why are you doing this?" Maya said. It was the same question Jeff had asked in the rice cake shop. Kim was beginning to understand it was the family's central question. Not suspicious, not ungrateful, but genuinely precise. They wanted to understand the architecture of a thing before they accepted it. They did not take what they could not account for. He respected it every time and found it equally difficult to answer. "I was in that shop for a reason," Kim said. "I don't fully understand the reason yet. I'm operating on the assumption that understanding it is less important than acting on it." Maya studied him with the same careful measuring quality her son had. Her eyes were dark and very still, and missed nothing. "You knew the shopkeeper's name?" she said. "I own the building." A pause. "You own a lot of buildings," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." "What kind of man owns that many buildings?" Kim sat down in the chair across from her. The chair Jeff had slept in, he had noticed. With a blanket pulled up and Zoba tucked against his side, both of them asleep when Kim arrived. Jeff's sneakers placed neatly by the door, with a wad of newspaper stuffed into the left toe to absorb the moisture. "The kind of man," Kim said carefully, "who has done things that cannot be undone and is attempting to determine whether that is the whole of what he is." Maya looked at him for a long time. "My mother used to say that people show you who they are in the small moments," she said finally. "Not the speeches, not the grand gestures, the small ones." "She sounds like someone worth knowing." "She was." A pause. "She died 6 years ago, before all of this." She looked at the ceiling briefly. "I'm glad she didn't see it, and I wish she were here every single day." Kim said nothing. He did not have to. He understood the specific arithmetic of that sentence, the simultaneous relief and devastation of loss, in a way that required no translation. They sat in the particular quiet of two people who have each lost someone essential and recognize the shape of it in each other. "Tell me about the insurance claim," Kim said. "All of it, from the beginning." And she did. What Maya Hayes laid out over the next 90 minutes was not a story of misfortune. It was a blueprint of institutional predation. Kim had spent 40 years operating outside the law and had therefore developed an unusually clear view of how the law actually functioned. Not as a system of justice, but as a system of resource allocation, where outcomes correlated directly with the capacity to sustain a fight. He had exploited this understanding many times, from many angles, for his own purposes. He had never sat across from one of its victims and listened to the full accounting. Houston Methodist had placed Maya on medical leave within 48 hours of the accident, a speed that her attorney, had she had one, would have immediately recognized as institutional self-protection rather than procedural routine. The workers' compensation claim had been routed to a third-party administrator, a company called Meridian Claims Management, which had denied it 61 days later on the grounds of a pre-existing spinal condition. Maya had no pre-existing spinal condition. She had 9 years of employment physicals at Houston Methodist to document this. Meridian Claims Management had these records. They had acknowledged receipt of these records in writing on 3 separate occasions. They had denied the claim anyway. The appeals process had produced 2 additional denials in 14 months, each more specifically worded than the last, each citing slightly different language from the same non-existent pre-existing condition, as though repetition with variation would eventually constitute evidence. Maya had filed a complaint with the Texas Department of Insurance. The complaint was under review. It had been under review for 7 months. She had contacted 2 attorneys. The first had told her the case was strong, but the timeline was long, and the contingency risk was high given her inability to contribute to legal costs. The second had quoted a retainer of $8,000. She had $800 in a checking account. She had been rationing insulin for 4 months. Kim listened to all of this without expression. He asked 3 specific questions. He wrote nothing down. He did not need to. He had spent 40 years training his memory to retain the kind of information that could not safely be committed to paper. When she finished, he sat for a moment in the quiet of the apartment. Then he said, "Meridian Claims Management. Who owns them?" Maya blinked. "What?" "The third-party administrator. Who is the parent company?" She had not known to ask this question. She pulled the denial letters from a manila folder she kept under the couch cushion, the closest flat surface she could reach on bad days, and read the fine print on the letterhead. "Meridian Claims Management is a subsidiary of—" She stopped. "Say it," Kim said. "Consolidated Southern Healthcare Partners." She looked up. "That's the same parent company as Houston Methodist's liability insurance carrier," Kim said. "Yes." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. "They were never going to approve the claim," Maya said. Her voice was very flat, very even. The voice of a woman who had suspected something for 14 months and has just had the suspicion confirmed in precise, specific terms. "No," Kim said. "They were not. The doctors, the appeals, the complaint, none of it was—" "The process was designed to exhaust you," Kim said. "It nearly worked." Maya looked at the denial letters in her hand. 9 years of hospital shifts, the patient she had saved lying on top of her asking if she was okay. 14 months of forms and phone calls and careful wording and letters under the mattress because the kitchen table was too far on bad days. Her hands were very still. "Mr. Kim," she said. "Kim is fine." "Kim." She looked up. "What exactly are you going to do?" Kim stood, straightened his coat, and picked up his car keys from the table. "What needs doing?" he said. Marcus Lim filed the lawsuit against Houston Methodist and Meridian Claims Management on a Thursday morning, 12 days after Kim's first visit to Holman Street. The filing was 47 pages. It named Houston Methodist directly in the negligence claim, documented the 4 outstanding maintenance requests for the patient lift, cited the conflict of interest between the hospital's liability carrier and its workers' compensation administrator, and included a section on bad faith insurance practices that Marcus Lim described to his paralegal, with visible satisfaction, as the cleanest case he had seen in 11 years of workers' comp litigation. Kim had not drafted the lawsuit. He had simply made certain that Marcus Lim had access to every document that existed. Documents that Maya had organized into that manila folder under the couch. Documents that Kim's contacts within Houston Methodist's administrative structure had made available through channels that did not require legal process. Documents that Meridian Claims Management's own internal records contained, which had come to Kim through means he would not describe to Marcus Lim, and which Marcus Lim was professionally wise enough not to inquire about. The case that Maya Hayes had not been able to fight from a 2-room apartment with no income and chronic pain and 2 children. That case, once resourced, was not complicated. It was simply a matter of having the capacity to sustain it. Kim had capacity. He had been accumulating it for 40 years. He brought this capacity to bear on Maya Hayes' situation with the same quiet, methodical efficiency he brought to everything, which was total and unhurried and completely without drama, because drama was for people who were uncertain about outcomes. Kim was not uncertain. Jeff watched all of this from the precise, careful distance of a child who has learned that good things frequently disappear and has therefore developed the habit of not fully believing in them until they have proven themselves over time. He continued getting up at 5:30 every morning. He continued walking Zoba to the church daycare on Tuam Street before school. Continued collecting bottles on afternoons when his homework was done. Continued checking the pill organizer against the calendar. Though the insulin was consistent now, had been consistent for 2 weeks, which was the longest unbroken stretch in 4 months. And he checked it anyway because the habit of checking was not the kind of thing you stopped when the emergency paused. He watched Kim come to the apartment. Every morning for the first week. Every other morning the week after. He watched the refrigerator fill up and stay full. He watched his mother sit upright for longer periods. Watched the careful rationing of movement ease slightly as the pain management improved with proper medication. He watched Marcus Lim come on a Thursday afternoon with a briefcase and a yellow notepad and sit at the kitchen table for 3 hours, while Maya walked him through everything in that flat, precise voice. And he watched his mother's hands on the table. Still, controlled, certain, and understood that she had been waiting a long time for this specific moment. He watched Kim. He watched him the way his mother had taught him to watch people. Not the surface, not what they said, but what they did when they thought the watching had stopped. What Kim did when he thought the watching had stopped was this. He stood in the kitchen doorway one evening while Maya slept, and Zoba was drawing at the table, and he looked around the apartment, at the crack in the glass coffee table, at the single working burner on the stove, at the window that didn't fully seal and leaked cold in a thin, steady stream that Jeff had been countering with a rolled-up towel for 3 winters. And his face did something that Jeff had not seen it do before. It lost its flatness. Not into softness exactly, into something older and quieter than either. He stood there for a long time. Then he took out his phone and made a call in a voice too low for Jeff to hear from the hallway. 3 days later, a maintenance crew arrived at the building. They worked for 2 days. The window sealed. The burner was replaced. The crack in the front step was repaired. The mailboxes were replaced entirely with new ones that locked. The landlord, when Maya called to ask about the repairs, told her he had decided the building needed attention. He said this in the specific, careful tone of a man who has received a communication he does not intend to discuss further. Jeff understood then, not all of it, not the specifics, but the outline of the kind of man Kim Jae-won was. The kind whose phone calls produced maintenance crews and sealed windows and landlords who suddenly decided buildings needed attention without further discussion. He sat with this understanding. He turned it over. He did not ask his mother about it because she was managing enough, and he did not ask Kim directly because he had not yet decided what question to ask. He waited. He was good at waiting. He had learned it the same place he had learned everything else important, from necessity. The surgery consultation happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the rice cake shop. The surgeon's name was Dr. Raymond Park. He operated out of the Texas Medical Center and had the specific quality of professional confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from an unusually long track record of being correct. He reviewed Maya's imaging for 6 minutes and then looked up with the expression of a man who has seen something solvable and is relieved to report it. The fractures were not ideal. The nerve compression was significant, but the window for intervention had not closed. He could operate. Recovery would be 6 to 8 months of structured rehabilitation. Full return to nursing work was realistic. Not certain. Medicine did not deal in certain. But realistic in a way that was meaningfully different from impossible, which was the word that had been occupying the space in Maya's chest for 14 months. Maya sat in the consultation chair and listened to all of this with her hands folded in her lap. Kim sat beside her. He had not been invited, exactly. He had driven her to the appointment because the bus took 40 minutes, and getting on and off buses was still an exercise in managed pain, and she had not told him to stay in the car because she had, over 3 weeks of his persistent quiet presence, begun to make the specific accommodation that very self-sufficient people make when they encounter someone whose assistance is both genuine and correctly scaled. She had begun to let him. This was not a small thing for Maya Hayes. Jeff, watching from the waiting room through the consultation room's glass panel, understood it was not a small thing. When Dr. Park finished, Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When can you schedule it?" Dr. Park looked at his calendar. "I have an opening in 10 days. Maya looked at Kim. Kim looked at her. 10 days, she said. 10 days, Kim confirmed. She looked back at Dr. Park. "Book it," she said. The night before the surgery, Kim came to the apartment after dinner and sat with Maya while Jeff got Zoba to sleep. Jeff did not go to sleep himself. He sat in the hallway outside the bedroom door, back against the wall, listening. Not eavesdropping exactly, monitoring. The way he always did. The way he had learned to do. He heard his mother's voice, low and careful. He heard Kim's voice, lower. He heard the particular rhythm of two people talking in the dark about things that matter. Not the performing kind of conversation. Not the kind with beginnings and conclusions and purposes. But the kind that just moves, that follows its own current. He heard his mother laugh once. A real laugh, unguarded, surprised out of her. He had not heard that laugh in 14 months. He had not been sure, in the private, careful accounting he kept, whether he would hear it again. He put his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. He heard Kim's voice saying something he could not make out fully, low and even, and then a silence, and then his mother saying, "She sounds like she was extraordinary," and Kim saying, after a pause that held everything, "She was the best person I knew." Jeff opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling of the hallway. Water stain in the corner, light fixture with a bulb that had been out since September. He thought about the man in the corner of the rice cake shop, standing up. Wait. He thought about all the other men in that corner who had not stood up, all the other Tuesdays, all the other boys in doorways. He thought about what it meant that Kim had been in that shop on that specific night, in his wife's shop on her birthday month, and had been sitting alone in the corner thinking about her when Jeff walked in. He did not have language yet for what he was thinking. He was 11 years old. The language would come later, in a year, at a podium, in front of a room full of people. For now, he just sat in the hallway and felt the knot behind his sternum loosen another fraction, and listened to two broken people in the next room slowly, quietly, help each other remember they were still alive. The surgery was 9 hours. Kim sat in the waiting room for all 9 of them. Juan brought food at hour 3. Zhang Kim ate some of it. Juan sat nearby and said nothing, which was one of the things Kim had valued about him for 11 years. At hour 6, Catherine, Kim's personal assistant, who had been with him for 16 years and who managed his legitimate enterprises with the brisk, competent authority of a woman who had seen everything twice, arrived with a coffee and a folder of items requiring signature. She sat both on the chair beside Kim without comment. Kim signed what needed signing. He did not open the other items in the folder. Catherine took them back without asking why. At hour 7, Jeff arrived with Zoba on his hip. Not on his back, hip. She was awake and carrying a small stuffed bear that Kim had not seen before, and that had appeared in the apartment within the last week without explanation. The way things had begun appearing in the apartment without explanation. Jeff sat down across the waiting room. Zoba looked at Kim. "Is Mama sleeping?" she asked. "The doctors are fixing her back," Kim said. Zoba considered this. Like when I fixed my bear? She held up the stuffed animal. It had a tear along one seam that had been repaired with mismatched thread. Like that, Kim said. Yes. Zoba nodded, apparently satisfied with this framework, and climbed off Jeff's hip and came and sat down next to Kim in the waiting room chair. She did not ask permission. She simply came and sat down the way she did everything, with the total confidence of someone who has never yet been told that the world is not fundamentally safe. Kim looked down at her. She was looking at her bear with focused attention, turning it over, checking the repair. He felt something happen in his chest that was not the cardiac condition, and was not grief, and was not the thing he had felt in the car the first night. It was something he did not have a name for, and he was not sure he needed one. Jeff was watching him from across the room with those careful measuring eyes. Kim met them. Neither of them looked away. At hour 9, Dr. Park came through the double doors in his surgical cap and found, in the waiting room, an 11-year-old boy, a 3-year-old girl who had fallen asleep against the arm of a man in a charcoal overcoat, and said man, who was not family, not husband, not anything with a clean legal name, sitting with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have decided that wherever they are is exactly where they are supposed to be. Dr. Park looked at this arrangement. He said, "The surgery went well." Jeff closed his eyes. Zoba slept on. Kim looked at the ceiling of the waiting room and thought about his wife and how she would have said, in that voice she used when something happened that confirmed what she had always believed. "You see? You see what happens when you stay?" He had spent 4 years not staying anywhere. He thought he understood now what that had cost him. He thought he was beginning to understand what staying might return. Maya Hayes woke up in recovery at 6:17 in the evening to find a get-well card on the bedside table, drawn in crayon by a 3-year-old hand. A figure with a large round head and 2 legs and what might have been a crown, labeled in Jeff's careful printing. From Zoba, "Feel better. The bear is named Mango." She held it in both hands for a long time. Outside the window of her recovery room, Houston moved through its December evening. The skyline lit against the dark. The medical center's towers casting long shadows across the South Texas Medical District. The city going on the way it always did. Indifferent and enormous, and full of people in doorways asking for things that cost nothing to give. She thought about 9 years of night shifts. She thought about the East Wing hallway and the floor coming up to meet her. She thought about 14 months of letters under the mattress and a pill organizer and a son who did the math on her behalf and said nothing. She thought about a man in a charcoal coat who had been sitting in the wrong place at the right time and had stood up. She closed her hand around the card. She slept. The thing about Kim Jae-won that nobody who feared him understood, and most people who knew him feared him, was that he had never actually wanted the empire. He had wanted Mireille to be safe. That was where it had started, 40 years ago, in a different city, in a different life, when he had been 21 years old and newly arrived in Houston with $200, functional English, and the particular clarity of a young man who has grown up with nothing and has decided, with the cold precision of someone who has thought it through completely, that nothing is not a permanent condition. Mireille had come 2 years later. She had been 23. She had laughed at things that weren't jokes and cried at things that weren't sad, and had the specific quality of moral certainty that belongs to people who have never once in their lives confused what was right with what was easy. She had known exactly what Kim was building and had loved him anyway, the way people love someone when they see them entirely. Not the version the person presents, but the version underneath it, the one that is still the original thing before the world got to it. She had made him a condition early on, stated plainly and without negotiation. You don't bring it home. Whatever it is, it does not come through this door. He had kept this condition for 36 years, not because she had asked him to, because the apartment, and then the house, and then the larger house, was the one place where he was not what the rest of the world knew him to be. It was the one place he was simply a man who loved his wife. He had protected that place with the same absolute ruthlessness he brought to everything else, which meant that for 36 years he had 2 lives that never touched. When Mireille died, quietly, quickly, a cardiac event on a Wednesday afternoon in March, while he was in a meeting he could not have anticipated would be the meeting he was in when his world ended. The division collapsed. There was no longer a home self and an empire self. There was only the empire and the man inside it who had forgotten, without her, what he was for. He had spent 4 years trying to remember. He had not managed it alone. He was beginning to understand that this was the point. Maya came home from the hospital on a Friday. She came home to an apartment that was the same apartment, same address, same number on the door, same building on Holman Street, and also not the same apartment at all, in the way that a thing can remain itself in every technical particular while becoming something different in the ways that matter. The window sealed completely now. No rolled towel needed. The kitchen had a full refrigerator and a working stove with 4 burners. The crack in the coffee table had been replaced, not the glass, the whole table, quietly, without announcement. A different table, in the same space that Jeff had noticed one morning and said nothing about, because he had learned by now to receive things without requiring explanation. The light fixture in the hallway had a working bulb. The bedroom had a proper bed frame instead of the box spring on the floor that had been making Maya's recovery harder than it needed to be, and which Kim had identified on his 3rd visit and corrected on his 4th without saying anything about it to anyone. What Kim had not replaced, had not touched, had not altered in any way, because he understood instinctively, without being told, the specific architecture of dignity, was anything that belonged to the family's own history. The drawings Zoba had taped to the refrigerator, the shelf of library books above the kitchen table, the photograph of Maya's mother on the windowsill, the small, careful order of a household that had been maintained through extraordinary difficulty by a woman who had decided that difficulty was not an excuse to stop keeping things right. He had built around all of it, not over it, around it. Maya noticed this. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, precisely without comment, filing it in the specific category of information she kept about Kim Jae-won, which had been growing for 2 months and which she had not yet decided what to do with. What she had decided, lying in the recovery room in the Texas Medical Center with a crayon drawing in her hand and 9 hours of surgical repair in her spine, was that she was done being careful about receiving. She had been careful for 14 months. She had been careful her whole life in the specific way that women who have been left must be careful, guarding against the moment when the thing you have allowed yourself to depend on disappears and takes a piece of you with it. Kim Jae-won was not going to disappear. She did not know how she knew this. She knew it the way she had known, on the East Wing floor, with the patient standing over her asking if she was okay, that her back was seriously damaged. Not from the pain, which was everywhere and told her nothing specific, but from a deep internal diagnostic certainty that came from 9 years of knowing bodies and what they were telling you if you were willing to listen. She knew people the same way she knew bodies. Kim Jae-won was not a man in the process of leaving. He was a man in the process of arriving somewhere he had not been in a very long time, and he was arriving through her door, and she had decided, in the recovery room on a Friday, with a crayon drawing of a girl named Zoba and a bear named Mango, that she was going to let him come in. The physical therapy started 2 weeks after surgery. It was hard in the specific grinding way that recovery is hard. Not dramatic, not acute, but persistent. A daily renegotiation with a body that had been still for too long and was learning motion again in increments so small they were difficult to perceive unless you were paying close attention. Maya paid close attention. She was constitutionally incapable of doing otherwise. Kim drove her 3 mornings a week. He sat in the waiting room with a coffee and whatever required his attention that day. There was always something requiring his attention, and did not come into the therapy room unless invited, which she knew because she checked once, and he was not there. And she had found herself, unexpectedly, registering his absence as something she noticed. She did not examine this too closely. What she examined instead, because she was a woman who processed things by understanding them, was the question she had been sitting with since December. The question of what kind of man Kim Jae-won was. Not the surface version, not the empire, not the charcoal coat and the 3 phone calls and the maintenance crew. The version underneath. She was a nurse. She had spent 9 years reading people past what they presented, past the performed stoicism of men who were frightened, past the artificial cheerfulness of people preparing for bad news, past every species of human armor, to what was actually happening inside the body, inside the person. She read Kim the same way. What she saw was this: a man who had organized his entire life around the protection of one person, and who had not, in 4 years, found a new organizing principle. A man who was not depressed exactly. Depression was a specific clinical thing, and this was not quite that, but who had the quality of someone operating at partial capacity. A man who showed up completely for other people's problems and returned every evening to a house where nothing needed him. She also saw something else. Something she noticed first in the 2nd week of physical therapy, when she came out of the session to find Kim in the waiting room, not reviewing documents, but simply sitting, still, in the way that people sit when they are not resting, but enduring. She had seen that specific stillness in cardiac patients, in men who were used to driving hard and had suddenly been told to stop, in people whose bodies were staging a protest their minds had not yet acknowledged. She watched him for 3 more visits. Then, on a Thursday morning in February, coming out of therapy and finding him in the waiting room with that stillness on him, she sat down next to him instead of going to the car. He looked up. "When did you last have a checkup?" she said. A pause. "My cardiologist." "When?" The pause this time was longer, the kind of pause that is itself an answer. "Kim." Her voice had the specific quality it carried when she had made a clinical determination and was communicating it as plainly as the situation required. "I have been watching you for 6 weeks. You get winded on the stairs and you don't think I notice. Your color is off in the mornings. You have been ignoring something, and I need you to stop ignoring it." Kim looked at her. "You sound like a nurse," he said. "I am a nurse," she said. Book the appointment this week." A silence. "You just had spinal surgery," he said. "That's not what we're talking about." He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the flatness, something older and more exposed than the flatness. The expression of a man who has been seen past his own armor by someone who had no reason to look that carefully and who does not know, in this moment, what to do with being seen. "Mireille used to..." he started. I know, Maya said. Book the appointment. He booked the appointment. The cardiologist's report came back on a Tuesday. Significant arterial blockage, 2 vessels. Surgery recommended within 30 days. The kind of report that, had it come 6 months later, would have arrived as an obituary instead of a diagnosis. Kim sat in the parking lot of the Texas Heart Institute and read the report twice, then sat for a while in the particular silence of a man who has just been told that the thing he has been ignoring has been quietly killing him, and that he has barely caught it in time. He thought about Mireille. He thought about how she had watched her patients, the way she had watched them past what they said, past what they performed, straight to what their bodies were actually doing. He had loved this about her, and had also, privately, always known that she watched him the same way. That she had seen things in him he would never have permitted anyone else to see. That this was what it meant to be truly known by someone. He had believed for 4 years that this kind of knowing died with the person who held it. He sat in the parking lot and understood that he had been wrong. Maya Hayes, who was 40 years old and still learning to walk without wincing, who had been his project, his purpose, the thing that had pulled him back into the world. Maya Hayes had been watching him for 6 weeks with 9 years of trained clinical attention and had seen exactly what was happening and had said something about it with the flat, certain voice of someone who was not going to look away from what she saw. She had given him back his life. He had come to her apartment in December believing he was the one doing the giving. He sat with this for a long time. Then he called Catherine and told her to clear his schedule for the next 30 days. Catherine said, "Of course." She said it in the tone she used when she had been expecting a particular call and was relieved it had finally come. Kim's surgery was on a Monday in late February. He had not made it a significant event. He had told 4 people, his attorney, Catherine, Juan, and Maya. He had not told the 11 men who answered to him because his operational capacity was not their concern as long as it was being managed, and it was being managed by Catherine, who had been managing it, in the ways that mattered, for 16 years. Maya came to the hospital. She came on her own, which cost her something physically. She had Juan's number and had refused to use it. She walked from the bus stop on Fannin Street to the Texas Heart Institute's main entrance with the careful, deliberate pace of a woman in recovery who has decided that this is a thing she is going to do, and pain is not a sufficient counter-argument. She sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. Jeff came at hour 3 with Zoba. He had not been told to come. He had come because he had done the math, the way he always did the math, and determined that Kim Jae-won should not be in a hospital alone the way he had apparently been alone for 4 years, and that this was a correctable condition, and that correcting it was what needed doing. He sat down across from his mother in the waiting room. Zoba looked around, identified Kim's assistant Catherine in the corner, and went and sat next to her because Catherine had, over the previous 2 months, established herself as a reliable source of interesting items. She kept a bag that contained, among other things, good pens and a small notebook and individually wrapped chocolates, the existence of which Zoba had identified on her second encounter with Catherine and had not forgotten. Catherine produced the notebook and the good pen without being asked. Jeff looked at his mother. "He doesn't know we're here," he said. "No," Maya said. "Good," Jeff said. They sat. At hour 6, Dr. Raymond Park, who had reconstructed Maya's spine and who had, in the weeks since, become something like a recurring character in the improbable story of these intersecting lives, came through the double doors and found the waiting room containing a woman in physical therapy, a boy who watched everything, a 3-year-old drawing in a notebook, one and a personal assistant who had been quietly running a significant Houston enterprise via phone for the last 6 hours. He said, "The surgery was successful." Maya closed her eyes briefly. Jeff looked at the ceiling. Zoba did not look up from the notebook. Catherine set her phone down on her knee and said, "Thank you, doctor," in the voice of a woman who has been holding her composure in place for 6 hours with both hands and is now, carefully, setting it down. Kim came home, not to his own house, which was large and empty and had been for 4 years, but to the apartment on Holman Street, because Maya had said, plainly and without discussion, that he was recovering there, and he had looked at her and understood that this was not a suggestion. He slept in the living room on a proper pullout, which had appeared, like several other things in the apartment, without announcement or attribution. He was there for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, something shifted in the apartment that Jeff observed with the same careful attention he brought to everything. It was not dramatic. It was not a single moment. It was a series of small, ordinary things that accumulated into something larger than any of them individually. It was Kim at the kitchen table in the morning with coffee, reading while Maya did her physical therapy exercises on the mat by the window. It was Zoba climbing onto Kim's lap with a book and demanding it be read, and Kim reading it, twice, in the flat, unhurried voice he used for everything, which turned out to be, improbably, exactly the right voice for children's books. It was the 4 of them eating dinner at the kitchen table, properly, together, the way Jeff could not remember eating dinner in over a year. And the conversation that moved the way real conversation moves, without agenda, following its own current. It was Kim helping Jeff with his history homework on a Tuesday night, not doing it for him, asking questions, following Jeff's reasoning, correcting with precision and without condescension, in the manner of someone who respects the person they are teaching. It was Jeff watching this and thinking, he was a father once, in some version of himself that didn't survive his wife. It was Jeff thinking, he is trying to remember how. The lawsuit settled in March. Marcus Lim called on a Wednesday morning, and Maya sat at the kitchen table with the phone against her ear and her free hand flat on the table the way it always was when she was receiving significant information and needed to stay grounded, and she listened. The settlement figure was significant, not obscene. Marcus Lim had counseled against demanding the obscene number because the obscene number would produce a protracted fight, and what Maya needed was resolution. But significant. Enough to cover the surgery costs, the 14 months of lost wages, the rehabilitation, and enough remaining to constitute a foundation rather than a repair. Houston Methodist had also, as a condition of settlement, agreed to a formal maintenance review of all patient lift equipment across all facilities, a condition Marcus Lim had insisted on, and which Kim had told Marcus Lim to insist on, because the condition that had broken Maya Hayes's back had been there for 7 months, and 3 other staff members had flagged it, and the next person it hurt deserved better than a settlement. Maya sat with the phone against her ear for a long moment after Marcus Lim finished. Then she said, "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." She set the phone down. She sat at the kitchen table in the apartment on Holman Street. The sealed window, the 4 working burners, the photograph of her mother on the windowsill, the drawings on the refrigerator. And she was quiet for a long time. Kim was in the doorway. He had heard enough. She looked up at him. "It's done," she said. He nodded. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about this honestly, the way she thought about everything. Like I've been holding my breath for 14 months, she said. And I just stopped. Kim looked at her. Mireille used to say... He stopped. Started again. She used to say that surviving something hard doesn't mean you get back to who you were before. She said you get to someone further along. Maya was quiet for a moment. She was right, she said. She usually was. In October, the Kim Hayes Foundation held its first event. Kim had not wanted to call it that. He had proposed several alternatives, all of which Maya had rejected with the same quiet precision she brought to rejecting things she had decided were wrong. And the name had remained because Jeff had said, simply, looking at both of them, "That's what it is," and neither of them had found a sufficient counter-argument. The foundation's focus was specific: families in Harris County dealing with denied workers' compensation claims. They connected people with attorneys, covered medical costs during the appeals process, and, because Kim understood from 40 years of experience that the systems people were fighting were designed to outlast them, they paid people's living expenses for as long as the fight required. In its first 6 months before the formal launch, they had served 7 families. Marcus Webb, Northside, construction accident, workers' comp denied 3 times. Elena Reyes, East End, warehouse injury, 9 months of appeals with no income. Patricia Nguyen, Spring Branch, back injury, same story, different company, same designed exhaustion. 7 families, waiting list growing. Jeff had named them all. He kept a list in a notebook, names, and situations, status. In his careful printing, the same printing that had labeled the crayon drawing in the recovery room. He updated it weekly. He had begun, by October, to sit in on the intake meetings when families came to the foundation's temporary office space on Main Street, not speaking, just present, just listening, with the specific quality of attention that he had been practicing his whole life without knowing it was a skill. Kim watched him in these meetings and thought about what Jeff would be in 10 years, 20. He thought about what this boy, who had carried his sister for 6 hours on a December night, with $12 in his fist and his shoulders set against the weight of everything, what this boy would do with the foundation, with resources, with the years ahead of him. He thought about it with something he had not felt in 4 years directed at the future. He thought about it with hope. At the foundation's first public event, in a rented space on Main Street with 50 donors and 7 served families and a spread of food that included, at Zoba's specific insistence, rice cakes from the shop on Alabama Street. Jeff stood up to speak. He was 12 now, taller, his voice carrying the first notes of its coming change. He wore a blazer Maya had pressed the night before, and his good shoes, which were actual good shoes now, which still felt, on certain mornings, like a fact that required periodic verification. He stood at the front of the room with the composed ease of a boy who has been the most responsible person in a room for most of his life, and has simply learned to be comfortable with that. The room went quiet. He looked at his notes once, then he set them down. 10 months ago, he said, I spent a day collecting bottles and cans in the cold. My sister was on my back the whole time. She was 3 years old, and I carried her because that was what needed doing. He paused. I had $12 at the end of the day. I went to a rice cake shop because my mom liked them, because it was her birthday, because I wanted to give her something that wasn't just more proof of how hard things were. He looked at the room. The shopkeeper told me they didn't give away product. A silence. A man in the corner said, "Wait." He looked at Kim, standing to the side of the room with Maya beside him. Standing, properly standing, without gripping the wall, 2 months out of physical therapy, upright in a way that still, sometimes, caught Jeff by surprise with the simple force of it. He didn't just buy my mom a cake. He came to our apartment that night. He came back the next morning. He found us an attorney. He found a surgeon. He fixed our window. A quiet laugh moved through the room. He did all of this because he saw us, because that's who he is. He paused. He looked at his hands, then back up. But I want to say something else, something I've been thinking about for 10 months. The room was very still. Kim was alone for 4 years before he walked into that rice cake shop. Not just by himself alone. The kind of alone where you forget what you're for. He came to our apartment every night that first week. And my mom, who had 3 fractured vertebrae and 14 months of insurance denials and no money and 2 kids, my mom saw it. He looked at Maya. She saw that he was not all right. She started watching him the way she watched her patients. And after a few weeks, she told him his heart was giving out and he needed to do something about it. He looked back at the room. She saved his life. A silence that had a different quality than the silences before it. Kim saw us. My mom saw Kim, not because either of them had anything left over. They were both running on empty. They saw each other anyway. He stopped. Something moved across his face. Not grief exactly, not sentiment, but the specific expression of someone who has been thinking about a thing for a long time and has finally found the exact words for it. My mom used to say, you see someone who needs something, you do it. She said it about nursing, about being a CNA on a night shift when you're tired and the ward is full and one more person needs one more thing. But I think it's bigger than nursing. I think it's the whole job, the entire job of being a person. He looked at the 7 families seated in the front rows. Marcus Webb, Elena Reyes, Patricia Nguyen, 4 others. People who had been carrying the same weight Jeff had carried. The weight of a system designed to outlast them, and who had been found by this foundation, the way Jeff had been found in a doorway. None of us in this room are here by accident. We are here because somebody, at a specific moment, chose to look instead of look away. Chose to stand up instead of stay seated. Chose to say, wait. A long pause. The question this foundation is asking, the only question that matters, is, who are you going to say wait for? He sat down. The applause was long and genuine, and the kind that comes from people who have been given language for something they already knew was true, but had not yet been able to say. Maya put her arm around him. Zoba climbed into his lap and put her face against his chest and said, in the carrying whisper of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned to modulate volume, "You did good, Jeff." "Thanks, Zoe." "Can we have the rice cakes now?" "Yeah, we can have the rice cakes now." Kim stood across the room and watched the 3 of them and felt the room go slightly out of focus, the way it sometimes did now. Not in grief, not anymore in grief exactly, but in the specific emotion that has no clean name, that lives at the intersection of loss and fullness, that belongs to people who have been broken and rebuilt and who carry both the fracture and the repair simultaneously. Catherine was beside him. Mireille would have loved all 3 of them, she said quietly. "She would have," Kim said. "She absolutely would have." Later, after the donors had left and it was just the 4 of them eating leftover food in the empty event space, Jeff said, in the way he sometimes produced observations that had been forming for a long time, "Do you think about her every day?" "Every single day," Kim said. "Does it hurt less?" Kim thought about this honestly, the way he had learned, in 10 months, to think about things honestly. The way Maya had always done it, and Jeff had always done it, and even Zoba, in her 4-year-old way, looked at the world with a directness that required honesty in return. "It hurts differently," he said. "It's still there. It will always be there. But it's become part of something larger. Part of why I was in that shop on that specific night." He paused. "She used to say that love doesn't diminish when you spread it out. She said it multiplies. I didn't understand it when she said it. He looked at the three of them. Jeff with his notebook, Zoba with a rice cake in each hand, Maya watching Kim with the warm, unguarded expression of a woman who has come through something very hard and found herself more fully on the other side of it than she was before. I understand it now, he said. Zoba held out a rice cake toward Kim. Mr. Kim, this one has the honey inside. You should eat it. Thank you, Zoba. It's the best kind. I know, he said. My wife used to say the same thing. He ate it, and maybe that is what second chances actually look like. Not rescue, not redemption with a clean before and after. Not a single dramatic moment in a doorway when a voice says wait and everything changes at once. Maybe it looks like this, a series of ordinary evenings. Coffee going cold on a kitchen table, a child's notebook open on the floor, someone asking if you're okay and meaning it completely. A window that finally seals. A crayon drawing on a refrigerator. Two people who each came to the other empty, slowly discovering they had been filling each other up the whole time. Outside the windows of the Foundation's event space, Houston moved through its October evening. The skyline brilliant against the dark Texas sky. Saw the medical center's towers lit across the south end, the streets that Kim had spent 40 years building a shadow empire beneath, the city that had held all of it. The grief, the empire, the rice cake shop, the boy in the doorway, the woman on the floor of the East Wing, held all of it without judgment. The way cities do, the way time does. The same season coming around again, the first edge of winter in the air. Somewhere in the 3rd Ward, on a street like Holman, a boy was probably in an alley behind a market counting bottles. Somewhere in Houston, a man was sitting alone in a corner of a restaurant, thinking about someone who was gone. And somewhere, if the math was right, if the variables held, if the thing that had happened in a rice cake shop on a December night was not an accident, but a pattern, in something that moved through the world seeking its own repetition. Somewhere, one of them was about to look up, and the other was about to say, wait, you see someone who needs something. You do it. That's the whole job. That's all it ever was.